What's going on, everybody? Today I'm going to be going over my July wrap-up where I talk about all the books I read in July. And let me tell you, since starting BookTube a little bit over a year ago, I've had good months, I've had great months, and then I've got months that I would say were the best months. And this July was definitely one of those later ones. It was one of the best months I've ever had on the channel. And I think a lot of it has to do with not just the quality of the books, but the impact these books have had on the genre. These are staples of the fantasy genre. And honestly, I can't believe I put some of these books off for so long, but I finally got to them. So I'm going to jump right in. This month started out with me completing the fourth and final book of the Book of the New Sun, which was Citadel of the Autarch. And if you follow the channel, you know that this book series has become my favorite of all time. I was pretty sure after reading Shadow of the Torture it was going to be, but it's a long journey. From Shadow of the Torture to the Citadel of the Autarch is 4 books full of just crazy epicness. So I was worried I wasn't going to, the momentum was going to kind of die down and I'd get tired of Gene Wolfe's style of storytelling or this world in general. But I am happy to say that I did not. And that's with me listening to the Alzabo Soup podcast, which breaks down these stories chapter by chapter, spending about an hour per chapter. And I listened to those podcasts for the first 2 books. I haven't gotten to books 3 and 4 yet, and I probably won't right now. I'll save those for later on in the year. But even with spending all that time in this world, by the time I finished book 4, I was not tired of the world. I was just as mind blown with the last book as I was the first book. And it, without a doubt, has become my favorite series of all time. And I know there's more to the story of Severian and Earth, but I wasn't ready to jump into that yet. I wanted to digest the Book of the New Sun for what it was, and then return there later on once I've had time to digest. Everything I've just read, essentially. And that brings me into the next book, which I wanted to be a palate cleanser because that Book of the New Sun was a lot to swallow. So I was looking for a palate cleanser. I knew which one I was going to do, but I thought it'd be fun to go ahead and poll what Twitter and BookTube thought would be a good palate cleanser to follow Book of the New Sun. And honestly, I was surprised by the results. So I decided to pick 2 books I see talked about a lot on BookTube, kind of in that palate cleanser demographic, which was Discworld and We Are Bob. And then I threw a 3rd book on the list, which I don't see talked about whatsoever on BookTube, and threw that on there as well. And I knew going into the poll which one I was going to choose. I just wanted to see what everyone else would say. And honestly, I thought Discworld would win by leaps and bounds. I thought We Are Bob would come in second, and then, of course, third I thought would be Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. That was the 3rd book I put on the list. It's one I don't see talked about a lot, and I hear it has that humorous tone. It's a satire feel. So I polled Twitter first, and honestly, I was blown away because between Connecticut Yankee and Discworld was not that close of a difference. Discworld did win out, but just by a slim margin. And then We Are Bob actually trails pretty far behind. But like I said, I thought it'd be fun to also pull it on BookTube. So while that was going, I threw it on BookTube. And I couldn't believe my eyes when a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court actually won the BookTube pool. So I don't know if this book is as big of a hidden gem as I thought it was going to be. Maybe it's a very well-read book on BookTube and I'm just not seeing it on the channels I follow. Or conversely, maybe we don't see a lot of it on BookTube and they wanted me to read it so that I could review it and then put it on the channel and let everyone know. Anyways, that's the book I ended up reading, was A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. I read this book with a purpose because I knew it was humorous and I was looking for a palate cleanser. But the other thing is, it's the very first book I'm reading as part of my new segment on the channel, which is Fantasy Through History, where essentially I go through a little timeline I've created, which has staples of the fantasy genre throughout history. And I read those books and see how fantasy has changed through time, see where the influences and inspiration of the fantasy authors today and even of the past have gotten their inspiration from. So I read that book with that goal in mind, and let me tell you something. It was a really good book. I don't know how I'm going to rate it yet, but I will say I have mostly positive feelings about it. I like don't even know where to put this because I went into this book with all the wrong expectations. I was expecting like a very humorous book, a palate cleanser, one that I didn't really have to think too much about, but I should have known better. Like, this is Mark Twain. And even Huckleberry Finn, which is one of the greatest stories of all time, it makes you think. And I got the same kind of treatment from Connecticut Yankee. So there was humor in the book. Like, I chuckled several times throughout the book, but I would not have described this book as a palate cleanser or just a humorous book in general. This book like addresses very heavy topics throughout it, and honestly kept kicking me out of the story and making me think about like life in general. Like, it had me pondering so much that there would be times that I'd be thinking about the real world and how what he's talking about applies to it for 15 minutes and have to rewind and re-listen to that whole segment over again. And that happens several times. So I wouldn't describe this as a palate cleanser or a book that you can just get lost in, but it was a really good book. And its ending, honestly, by the end of the book, I was kind of getting like a little bit fatigued. The book is a little bit longer than what I wanted or what I think it needed to be, but the ending just, wow, like it blew me away. I will be doing a full review of this book for that new segment, Fantasy Through History, but let me just tell you, like, great book. I have some issues with it, but all in all, generally positive. But if you approach this book with wanting a palate cleanser or wanting to just get lost in this world, I don't think this is the book to do it with. I think Discworld or We Are Bob would probably have been better choices as a palate cleanser. Moving on to the next book, at the beginning of the video, I kind of talked about staples of the fantasy genre, like classics that are important for people to read if you are interested in fantasy. And this book is one of those books that I have constantly heard about. It's one that I've wanted to read since I was a kid. That's kind of been there in the background. And if you follow the channel and watch the Libby versus Audible video where I discuss the Libby app, or if you watched my latest TBR video where I kind of talk about a few ideas of the next books I'm reading, even though I'm a huge mood reader and using the Libby app, sometimes I don't always get the next pick when I think I am. But if you watch those videos, I'm sure you have a pretty good idea of where I'm headed, and that is The Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is, of course, another book I'm going to be doing a full review on for my Fantasy Through History segment, considering the fact that it is really old. Like, if you look at where Tolkien is, I would say that Ursula K. Le Guin and Anne McCaffrey were right after Tolkien. Like, they are the next in line and kind of the next step in the progression to what we have today. And when I read the book, I couldn't believe that it gets such a rap for its prose. It, of course, was written for children back in the day, but I would not describe this as a children's book or even YA. Like, this book resonates with everyone, and I don't think I have read a better example of the classics hero journey than I did in this book. What she was able to accomplish in such a short amount of time, in such few pages, was incredible. I've talked in the past how a lot of the books I like are not necessarily books I would recommend to everyone. They're not universal reads. So, like, Book of the New Sun is not a book I would just recommend to a random stranger on the street. Dreams of the Dying, I definitely would not just randomly suggest a stranger would read. The Wizard of Earthsea is one of these books that is just universally applicable to everyone. Like, I would walk up to a stranger on the street, hand them this book, and say, you will love this book. You should read it. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I don't even have to think about the rating. Like, it was 5 out of 5 stars all the way, and I cannot wait to continue the story as the books become available for me on the Libby app. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll notice that, like, I never really got my palate cleanser book because a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court was not a palate cleanser. It was such a deep book that honestly at the end just sucker punches you straight in the stomach. So I still didn't have that palate cleanser. I jumped straight into Wizard of Earthsea because it came available on Libby and I didn't want to lose my book. So I went ahead and read that one next, but I was still like kind of in the mood for a palate cleanser. And that's where this next book comes up, because I started my Discworld journey with The Color of Magic. And if you have any experience with Discworld or have watched any reviews on Discworld, the number one thing you'll hear is do not start Discworld with The Color of Magic. I ignored all that and started with The Color of Magic. I've made a video about like some reading pet peeves I have, and one of them is to read books in publication order. It's a pet peeve that I don't see myself breaking anytime soon. But if there was one I was considering breaking it for, it was Discworld. Because I want to read Pratchett. He is a staple of the fantasy genre and is also a book I'm doing with Fantasy Through History, just because I feel he is a monumental figure of the fantasy genre. So I didn't want to ruin my experience with Discworld or Terry Pratchett, but I was ready. Like, it felt like the right time to enter the world, and I had The Color of Magic on Audible. So I pulled the trigger, started the world, and let me tell you, I think everyone else is wrong. The Color of Magic is a great place to start Discworld. Like, I was so happy with my experience. I'm right, everyone else is wrong. Listen to me. Because I couldn't believe the world that I was thrown into with The Color of Magic. And I'll talk more about why I'm right and everyone else is wrong in my complete review of the book. But I loved where we were thrown in. I love the fact that like one of our main characters is a tourist, which has never been seen or heard of in Discworld before, and all he's doing is going around and taking pictures of all the sights of Discworld with his little camera. You know, like it was like I was a tourist of Discworld, seeing all the things that a tourist of Discworld would want to see. All the things from the outside that make Discworld attractive to a reader, I got to follow on that journey. And I know people say it's not one of Pratchett's best books. Like, the plot wasn't the greatest thing in the world. His prose wasn't the greatest thing in the world. But that's not the reason this book for me was so amazing. It was truly the way it made me feel. Like, being thrown into such a soft magic system where magic is truly magic and the world doesn't always necessarily make sense was something that I didn't know I was missing. Like, we live in a world of hard magic systems, and I love hard magic systems. Brandon Sanderson is my favorite author, but I didn't know I was missing that magical feel that soft magic systems bring to the reader, and Discworld scratched that itch like none other. Like, I am eagerly looking forward to jumping into the second book of the series. I don't know when I'm going to do it. I've got to wait until my Audible subscription renews to get The Light Fantastic. But once it does, I am jumping on that book right away because I had so much fun here and I'm eager to see how the story continues. So keep your eyes out for the full review of The Color of Magic and why I'm right and everyone else is wrong. And that brings me to an end of the books I finished. I actually started one more book, which is going to continue the theme of kind of like my fantasy through history and just staples of the fantasy genre. It was one of the 5 books on the list of the books I was most excited to read starting BookTube, and I'm just now getting to it. But it's the first book of the Dragonriders of Pern, Dragonflight. And so far, it's blown me away, and I'm almost finished with this book now. I've only got like an hour left. I'm going to save it for my August wrap up, but it's going to be another one I do a full review over. But everyone sees the quality of that month, right? Like, I started off by finishing the Book of the New Sun, which is my favorite series of all time, hands down. I jumped into the Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, and even if it wasn't what I was looking for at the time, it hit hard, especially at the end. Then the Wizard of Earthsea, starting my journey with Ursula K. Le Guin. Then Discworld with Terry Pratchett, and then ending it by starting Dragonflight. Like that, it might be the best month on BookTube. I might need to go and rank a few of my months on BookTube to see if this actually is the best one, because there's a couple months that compete with it, like the month that I started The Wheel of Time, and then the month I read Dracula. I think were both months that just blew me out of the water. But even if it doesn't make the cut for the #1 reading month since starting book 2, it's definitely the best month of my life because I just welcomed my first child into our family. It's been quite an adjustment, but it has been a blast, and I love the kid more than I ever thought I could love anything so instantly. So even if this month doesn't make it as one of the best reading months, it's definitely one of the best months of all time. But anyways, that's my July wrap up. Get ready for the fantasy through history segment coming this month. I think the rest of the videos this month are probably just going to be reviews of the books I read during July. And until next time, I hope you're out there reading cool new books and exploring cool new worlds. And until then, I'll be back soon. Thanks for watching.